Well, good morning, everybody. Just to get us started today, I want to show you the latest update from the National Weather Service on total snowfall accumulation over the last 72 hours. And for a lot of us, this forecast was a pretty major bust, especially in parts of the eastern Corn Belt. I think some of the things that I personally struggled with was with this system that came out of Texas and then really dumped very heavy snow right in through this corridor. As it approached parts of Illinois and Indiana and Ohio, there was too much warm air out ahead of this. So in other words, we saw rain for a little while. And then secondly, the surface temperatures were just warm, right? So the snow was not initially sticking. The banding we anticipated, I don't think was as strong as originally thought in the models. And I think one of my biggest failures with this was assuming a 10-to-1 ratio. I think some of the ratios were closer to maybe 6 or 7-to-1 on that snow to liquid ratio. And as a result, there were a lot of folks in here who maybe anticipated quite a bit more snow that did not get it. So we do need to call out those busts when they do happen. And this was a really difficult one to forecast here. But I've been thinking a lot about the snow that we've seen here in the month of January. So despite the very warm temperatures compared to average, we have been cold enough to put down snow in places. And this is our latest snow water equivalent map. And I put this in the report, so take a moment if you want to and go look at it carefully. But what it shows us is if you were to melt all that snow, what would you get in terms of liquid? Now, we've taken a lot of in-depth look at what's going on throughout the western United States. We're going to focus in this more on the snowpack that's in parts of the Missouri Valley, that's part of the Mississippi Valley and the Ohio Valley, and also the water that's in the snow in parts of New England. But there was one important thing that was brought up to me yesterday when I was in Fargo, and that was, okay, we got a lot of water in the snow, but it's sitting on top of very dry ground. And I thought we would just take a quick look at that. So what I want to show you next is the soil moisture down to 40 centimeters or 16 inches. And so where we have a lot of the snow sitting on the ground, remember the lingering effects of the drought from last fall are still there. In other words, this snow came on top of a shallow frozen layer of soil, keeping it from, as it melts, kind of getting down into that. So we still see lingering drought through parts of North Dakota, for example, and throughout the Western Plains and Western Corn Belt, But as I looked at this closely, I did notice that from Missouri to Illinois, parts of Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, there's an area through here that extends into Ontario as well, that continues to show very dry conditions. I'm going to talk about that in a second, but I also want to point out that the forecast over the next 10 days keeps this entire area extremely wet, meaning we're going to be very vulnerable to flooding in this particular region as we go forward. But just take a look. Here's the last 30 days in terms of percent of normal precipitation. And there were some improvements with this last system as we think about the southern plains, but overall it did not undo kind of the longer standing drought issues there. But again, that area I was looking at right up in here, we would say near normal, even to above normal precipitation over the last 30 days. But just to kind of highlight the extent of that drought, I went to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and looked up their precipitation. This, again, just comes from our website, agweather.com, ag-wx.com. And what's interesting is last year, which is seen right here, that's the extent of the dry conditions that were experienced during fall. So even though there have been good precipitation events to start the new year, we continue to see those deficits lingering in the soil down deep. Now, looking at the soil conditions, just to click over here, we notice that soil moisture is relatively steady. This is down around 4 inches. It's relatively steady going forward. And mainly that's because the soil temperature is frozen. So we're not going to change this too much. But take a look. Going into the end of this weekend, starting into next week, some very cold air is coming in. That's going to take those 4-inch soil temperatures down there into the low 20s. And with that, I'll just show you for this part of the country, there's some snow that's coming in with this next system. So we better talk about it and get right on into this forecast. Today we have wind advisories out for the northern plains, high wind watches for parts of Montana. This is all winter storm watch and a winter weather advisory out for the Red River Valley. So as one system leaves, the next one comes diving in. You can see all of the regions down here, these polygons representing where there's flood warnings right now. Down across the river systems in these counties here across the southeast. And again, this is an area I'm very concerned about over the coming days with heavy rainfall. Strong winds are expected in Southern California today as well. But the high-res name is going to give us a clue as to, I think, where things are going. So starting it off about 9 o'clock this morning, we still have some wraparound snow showers on the back side of this low, but watch our first front coming in here out of the Canadian Prairie, moving over the Red River Valley of the North and extending snow possibly down here into Nebraska. This is by tonight. So snow squalls possibly here, but this front slides through. And some of this could be cold rain. Just be aware of that. Very, very cold rain because it's not cold air yet behind this front. So that slides through, brings in some snow showers over the Great Lakes. And then the beginning of this Arctic air mass that's diving down starts to show up early Friday, coming out of Alberta and Saskatchewan into parts of Montana, Idaho, and right into this part of Wyoming. And here comes that cold air. So we're going to watch that cold air dive down throughout the day on Friday into Friday night and set up a little clipper. So it kind of began life here and then raced across over into parts of Nebraska and Iowa. And it's going to spread some snow right in that corridor after putting down some snow into this area. Now, over that time period, much of the south stays relatively dry, but you see we're opening up the Gulf to bring in some moisture here soon. So let's get some idea on the snowfall numbers. I'm going to start you off with a view mostly of the west here. And so we're seeing better chances at picking up, over a foot of snow in the part of the Rocky Mountains here. And you can see that right along this corridor, there's going to be a transition from about maybe an inch and a half to some places picking up 5 to 6 inches. Moving into the northern plains of the United States, that's going to be the corridor that clipper follows. So there's going to be an area in through here that picks up 2 to 5 inches of snow, maybe locally heavier amounts, according to the National Weather Service. And don't forget, we still have a system that's leaving New England, so there still are places in New England that through this weekend are going to pick up some more snow, all right? But from here, I want to show you how the pattern resets itself up by looking first at temperatures. So here's today's highs compared to normal, and then we go into Friday. And then this is the shallow air mass of very cold Arctic air that's going to come in on Saturday. And as it pushes to the south, these are high temperatures compared to normal. We'll see negative single digits in Montana, stretching through the northern plains. But this cold air is going to really struggle to make it all the way into the south and southeast. So by next Tuesday into Wednesday, this large subtropical ridge down here is going to keep this whole area relatively mild south of that line. So there's going to be a setup of a shallow cold air mass diving down while warmer air attempts to overrun it. So you can see this is again late this weekend. There's a large ridge here sending warm air aloft while the cold air sinks south of it. And what we're getting concerned about here, just something we're watching at this point, is what that might mean to set up the atmosphere to produce freezing rain. Now, please do not let the colors or the sheer geographic area of what I drew here persuade you about what I'm talking about. What we're doing here is I'm using the GFS, the European, and the Canadian model to try to identify where those models are at least attempting to put down the risk of some freezing rain. This isn't like amount, it's just identifying where the models are looking for it. And again, we're going to watch this area in through here as having the best chance at overrunning. Could extend as far back into West Texas, but I'll just keep an eye on the Mid-South and parts of the Midwest for this with the first couple systems coming through. So let me show you them. I'm going to go to the European model run on this. So here's the clipper we talked about coming through on Friday. Here's the colder air advancing on Saturday, delivering the snow into Montana, stretching out into the plains. And now you can see where that snow band is going to set up right in through here as we work our way through midday Saturday and go towards Sunday. There's one high sitting here, a second high sitting here, and that's what's going to sandwich right in the middle, the cold air out of the Arctic and then the warm air from the Gulf of Mexico. So let's get into Sunday morning, Sunday midday, and Sunday evening. So a lot of storms here, but very cold air coming in behind it. So what we're seeing here is you're starting to notice that by maybe Monday morning, see the pink to black? That's where the models may give that overrunning and the risk of ice. And then you see again coming out of Texas and Oklahoma, this is now Monday night, spreading into parts of Arkansas, southern Missouri, the chances for getting the possibility here of some freezing rain. So that's what we're trying to identify. Where's that corridor that could see that? Because it'll be all rain to the south and snow to the north. Now, the European model is very aggressive on developing this system next Wednesday, about a week from now, a little less than a week from now in Texas. The GFS isn't on board for this, it's not. And there's some ensemble support for it, but this is going to be the big system midweek next week. I'm going to have to keep a close eye on attempting to forecast here. Let's look at some other components of this. This is the chance over the next 10 days of at least grabbing 3 inches of snow. So we're trying to identify those heavier snow corridors going forward. And from here, I wanted to show you total accumulated precip. Let's just play this out. We'll go all the way out there through a 10-day forecast. And I just want to remind you that what you're seeing right here, watch this. This is next Wednesday into Thursday. There's not a lot of ensemble support for that just yet. But the heavy rain right into this corridor, stretching again from eastern Texas to the mid-Atlantic and the Carolinas, that is in the forecast in all the models. The drier area is just to its north, right in through here. Now, as we get out there a little bit longer term, we do see that by about the 5th of February, that the big split flow pattern in the Pacific is trying to weaken. And you notice that the models are attempting to return some better flow into the west. This could result in 2 things. One, a return to decent precipitation from like Northern California through the Pacific Northwest, as we watch what had been very active subtropical jet move out into the open Atlantic. And 2, it's going to result in kind of a stop date on the extent of the really cold air that's coming through. Let me show you what I mean. North American view of the temperature pattern. This is a 5-day sliding window. So you can now see that through the beginning of February, we're going to really give us that high contrast pattern. Southeast ridge, Arctic front, right in the middle is where the action is going to be. But this cold air establishing itself throughout the Canadian Prairie, the northern plains into the Midwest, has kind of we now have a better idea on its kind of expiration date here. And if you notice, watch as I get out there at the time period that's the end of January through the 3rd of February, that we see some moderation beginning in the west. Notice that? Such that as we get into that first full week of February, the colder air tends to slide east, sets up more over the Hudson Bay to Greenland, and mild air begins to return. And if that occurs, this is going to set up better chances for wetter conditions. It's not a pattern, though, that slows down across the United States. So we're going to have to look out there into week 2 and try to get a better idea on that total precipitation. Right now, the models are not advertising strong signals one way or the other. So we're going to have to wait just a little bit to get a better analysis of it. But as we kind of wrap up the 2 weeks here in the United States, I want to bring you up to speed with a couple things in South America. I pulled off the latest NDVI data, and I linked this in the report today for Buenos Aires, Cordoba, and Santa Fe. And those recent rains have helped with the satellite-derived, plant vegetation health here using NDVI data, bringing them out of what had been the lowest values in the last 20 years. They're now up here above that number. Still nowhere close to the averages, but above where they were. And over the next 15 days, we see drier conditions showing up in the models in northern Mato Grosso, Tocantins, Para, these areas. This is where we're harvesting a soybean crop and planting corn, but still quite wet in central Brazil. And the newest model trends did show wetter conditions in southern Brazil. There's areas down here that are deep in drought, so could be some beneficial rains. While Buenos Aires is drier, they're also cooler in this forecast, but the wetter conditions kind of stretch throughout northern and western Argentina. So we have to just keep watching this pattern evolve. There are a few things changing we're going to discuss in tonight's in-depth report that are happening in the tropics and what that might mean for the rest of February. So we'll pick it up there. Have a good one. Thanks.